And now we're going to continue moving into stewarding land and water resources projects. Marta Kohmann is an assistant professor in the newly merged Department of Plant and Agroecosystems Sciences at UW-Madison. She's also an extension specialist in the Division of Extension in Forage Systems Agroecology. Please welcome Marta.
Hi, good morning. So yes, my name is Marta Kohmann. I just started as an assistant professor, as Heather mentioned. I started in January of this year, so I was very excited to get invited to be here because this is the fourth summit, but it's my very first one, so I appreciate the opportunity to share this with you. Another point that I wanted to make is that I'm very appreciative of the support of the Dairy Innovation Hub. This was actually the first grant that I applied to as an assistant professor, and I got it. So I feel very lucky, very fortunate to be here. It was also very significant to me to look through all the documentation that gave birth kind of to the Dairy Innovation Hub and all the very well documented list of priorities for me to come into a new position and be able to understand what are the needs, immediate and long-term was very interesting. So I'm going to be talking about manure application recommendations for alfalfa interseeded into corn silage. So what do we know about corn silage here in Wisconsin is that it's a very important part of the dairy industry. It occupies a very large acreage here in Wisconsin. Oftentimes, it is also planted after alfalfa termination. So oftentimes what producers take advantage of is that you get some of those nutrient credits, especially in terms of nitrogen, from terminating a legume and planting a grass afterwards. Now, very often, there is manure application involved in corn silage production, right? And there are several studies that show that soil cover significantly reduces the risk to water quality as it is associated with manure application. What do I mean by that? Very often, what we have is when we have corn silage production, during the growing season, we have the corn covering that soil. We harvest. Oftentimes, after harvest, that soil becomes exposed, and if there is events of large precipitation or rainfall, there is the risk, the potential, that there are going to be losses of nitrogen and phosphorus to water bodies. So one of the ways that we know to reduce that is to maintain that soil covered, especially with living crops, with living plants. Now, how about alfalfa? We know it's a great forage for lactating cows. We are always thinking, so as a forage scientist, I'm always thinking about forage production, how much and what quality is that forage needs to achieve so that the animals that are consuming it can really express all that genetic potential. But there is also a lot of ecosystem services, which are kind of the added values that are provided by those forages. So when I think about legumes, especially when I think about alfalfa, there are some advantages too. Soil health, soil cover. There is a very extensive root system, so there is a great use of water and nutrients, which was very apparent in this past year, particularly with the drought. There is potential to adding a legume in a rotation to reduce some of the diseases present in grasses, but there's also challenges to producing that alfalfa. So typically, in that first year, the production is about 50% of what is expected for a fully established stand. But there is also quite a bit of cost to establish that first year, which means that during that first year, you have both the greatest cost associated with alfalfa production and also the lowest production. So how can we intermediate both of those challenges associated with corn silage production and alfalfa production into a new system? So there is this new alfalfa interseeded into corn silage system. I put it here, a novel system, but in reality, there has been a lot of research, more than 10 years of research on how to make this system work. So in summary, the typical system will have corn, that corn is harvested, we have the exposed soil, we can potentially add some manure, and we plant alfalfa afterwards. So that's the very typical production system. On the interseeded system, we actually plant both of them together, the corn and the alfalfa, so that after we harvest that corn, the alfalfa remains underneath, kind of as a cover crop. It works as a cover crop to the corn, and the corn also serves as a companion crop to the alfalfa. So that during that first year, you harvest the corn, and on the second year, when you start, you basically start with a fully established alfalfa system, meaning that you skip that first low production system, basically. There are a couple of details about this to make it work, which is a result, again, of a lot of research. There is a time for alfalfa planting, but also we need to reduce the corn seeding rates a little bit to make sure that we're going to have some light coming through the canopy that will allow that alfalfa to grow. So what are some of the positives of this system? Again, we skip that first year of low production. We are going to maintain soil cover with living plants, which is very beneficial, very protective to water quality and soil. And over 4 years, we have done some studies that show that it's more profitable compared to other typical rotations over those 4 years. However, there are some challenges associated with it as well. So typically, in terms of the corn silage production, there is a little bit of a drag, typically 10%. In dry years, like this past year, that was greater because of the competition between alfalfa and corn. And there is also a bit of an increase in alfalfa disease pressure because under that corn canopy that holds a lot of moisture just really helps a lot of diseases to develop. And also, how about the manure? We still have manure that we need to apply to these fields. Can we apply it to this living crop or not? So these are the results from an Arlington demonstration plot that is comparing the typical and the alfalfa interseeded system. What I wanted to get your attention is that there are 2022, 2023. On top is management practices, on the bottom is production. So this was evaluated with the typical, which is corn silage, followed by spring-seeded alfalfa, and then the interseeded system with disease and growth regulator that is applied to the alfalfa to reduce competition a little bit, and also just with fungicide and insecticide. So what I want to get your attention is that in 2022, the amount of passes in terms of management is greater in the interseeded system because you are, in fact, managing 2 crops. But when we look at production over the 2 years, in terms of dry matter, there is an increase in the interseeded system compared to the traditional. That is mostly because of the increase in alfalfa. So what about the manure management? What am I looking at now? So we are currently running a study on small plots at 2 locations. And what we are looking, you can see here some of the corn that was already harvested. The rest is the alfalfa established. And we're going to evaluate what happens to that alfalfa and to soil responses in terms of when there's no manure applied, when manure is only applied in the fall, when manure is only applied in the spring, and both of them. And again, we're going to do some soil samples characterizations, already collected the samples. We're going to follow that alfalfa forage production and nutritive value in the year of alfalfa production, in the second year. I'm also looking at some soil respiration, and hopefully what we'll get out of this is the instructions for manure application in interseeded systems. Thank you very much.